So, for those of you who, well, first of all, I guess we'll start with this. Tell people who you are, what you do. Yeah, introduce yourself to my audience, please. Go ahead.
My name is Dan Norton. I am a Ayn Rand fan, and I promote Ayn Rand's ideas on the internet. I've got a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dan Norton1. I'm also on Twitter at Dan Norton111. I did go to graduate school for philosophy, got a PhD several years ago, and decided not to go to the traditional routes, which most people go who are in graduate school, which is become a professor. I decided to give YouTube a shot instead, and I do some other things as well. But I'm trying to grow my channel, eventually make it big enough where I can live on it. I have to do some other things right now. But the goal is just to spread Ayn Rand's ideas because I love them and I love talking about them. And I guess we'll do some of that today.
Certainly. Are you more of a Fountainhead Ayn Rand fan, or are you more of an Atlas Shrugged Ayn Rand fan?
I love both of her
Okay.
books.
You
Those
don't
are
have
her
a
two
favorite?
most famous novels. If I had to choose a favorite, I think I would say Atlas Shrugged, but I love both of them. She's also written some other fiction works which are not as well known. We the Living was her first one, set in Soviet Russia. It's the most autobiographical of her novels. She grew up in Russia when the communists took over in 1917, and that's the story which there are some parallels to her own life in that story. And then she also wrote a very short novelette called Anthem, which a lot of people might have come across in high school. It's often assigned there, and there's an essay contest, one of the largest in the nation, on that book. And then she's also written a lot of nonfiction, which is actually what I started with. I was most interested in her nonfiction to start with. So she's written on, she's got a collection on ethics, a book on political philosophy, on epistemology, aesthetics. She covers a very broad range of topics across her corpus, and
Certainly.
I love it all.
Okay. Well, you know what? There are things that I like that most people don't too, so I won't judge you too hard for that. Rather today, I what you contacted me to talk about was I made a post about the difference between doing good and feeling good. Um, and that's what I prepped to talk about the most, but I'm sure we will cover a variety of topics and pretty much I'm having you on because you had some questions, you wanted to discuss some things. So if you'd rather discuss something else, that's entirely fine as well. But I guess you asked me a question. I want to answer your question. What's the difference between doing good and feeling good? And you asked me on that on Twitter a few weeks ago. So I'll answer that. Uh, I guess the biggest example I can give of doing good versus feeling good is the state of activism in the United States. There are activists today who have substituted doing good with feeling good. So rather than do what works, that do what will lead to change, that what will get results, what will actually win, they prioritize the short term feeling good, doing like sticking it to the man, flipping off the police, right? Going up and interrupting a crowded theater concert and shouting "Free Palestine," right? It feels good. You feel like, oh man, I'm fighting the power. I'm going against the government. I'm doing all this. It feels like I'm doing something, but it does nothing. It does nothing. And so that would be my answer. What are some thoughts on this? Let's talk about it. Doing good versus feeling good. What are your thoughts? Go ahead.
One thing that comes to mind is the importance of being long range. So something might feel good to do in the moment, like shooting up heroin or getting drunk, but it could have very bad long run consequences. You could ruin your life if you are just acting on the whim of the moment. So it's very important to think about the consequences of what you do, plan your life long range. And I think that might map on somewhat to what you've said there. But the difference between short range and long range, I think, is a very important one. A lot of people, I think, they have this caricature idea of what it means to be selfish. This is something Ayn Rand talks a lot about. They hear the word selfish, and you think of some rude jerk who treats other people badly. But if you consider the long run consequences of living that sort of life, I think you can see that it's actually not in someone's self interest. Like if I treat you like a rude jerk, and you're not going to want to be my friend, you're not going to want to be a business partner with me. You might want to just cut me out of your life. And then, well, what are the results? What are the consequences for my life? Well, I've lost a potential friends, all kinds of potential values you could bring to my life, which are no longer a possibility since I've been a rude jerk, just acting on the whim of the moment. Um, so I think it's very important to, I guess, have this distinction between short and long run behavior. And I guess you could think of that in terms of doing good versus feeling good.
Sure.
But in the long run, I don't think you're going to feel good unless you do good. So I think in the long run, those two things
I
sync up.
don't
Like you're not going to be happy
I don't
in
know
the
if
long
that's
run if you
actually
are doing
true
bad in the
anymore,
short run.
though, right? And I don't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry, but I don't know if that's actually true anymore. And I think this is one of the pernicious places that we as a society have found ourselves in is it hit the reward for short-term thinking or short-range thinking, if you want to use that term, um, has become sustainable for someone's long term and a lot or long range, um, for their individual gratification in a lot of ways. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Um, you can use short range thinking and appeal to other short range thinkers in the moment, and you can garner clout, money, a following, all of which, if you're smart about it, you can turn to long range happiness, quote unquote, or long range kind of what people would see as success. And I think that that has uh, become kind of like a cyclical thing, and it's causing us. Eventually, it won't work. Eventually, the dam will break. But I'm our institutions are such, and they are strong enough to hold back that tide for quite a long time. So at least in the next, I'd say 5 to 10 years, I would suspect that this pattern I see people engage in of short term, short term, short term, short term, short term, short range, whatever what word you want to use here. They get immediately gratification, immediate reward, and they again, it sustains itself long term. Again, is that true happiness? Is that truly working? No, but it has the illusion enough to be a problem. What are your thoughts there? Go ahead.
Well, I think you can feel the results on the inside. So you might give an appearance to people who don't know you well, who don't follow your life closely. You're doing fine, but a smile is very easy to do. It doesn't mean very much. You know, anyone can smile. A dictator can smile. I don't think that means that your life is going well. I think if you act irrationally in a short range kind of way, you are going to suffer consequences psychologically, at least, maybe also existentially. Like if I know you're this kind of person who acts like a rude jerk and just acts impulsively on the whim of the moment, then I'm probably going to want to disassociate from you. You know, I'm not
You
going to want to be
might,
your friend. So
you might, but
yeah,
there are
and
others.
then you're going to be attracting other types of people who maybe are more like you, but I don't think that's going to be a good influence on your behavior. I think that's probably falling further down than where you want to be. You don't want to be surrounding yourself with other people who are irrational. It could be like you know,
I
it just
understand
worse.
that
It
you
makes
don't, but
your life even worse.
why wouldn't they? Like there are so look, I genuinely believe this that there are people who are happier than doing bad, for lack of a better term. They love hedonism. They're happier within hedonism. They're happier with garnering the clout, the fame, the money, the all this, right? That comes with being a rude jerk online. You can get a lot of money and a lot of following if you're a rude jerk to someone that people consider a bad person, right? So if you went to like Elon Musk, for example, and you were a rude jerk to Elon Musk, he might not want to be your friend, but all of his enemies suddenly see you as a warrior who will stand up against Elon Musk, and you are getting rewarded for that rude jerk behavior. So when you say like intrinsically on the inside they won't be happy, what do you talk about? What do you mean?
I don't think it means much to a rational person to get approval from scoundrels. So, I mean, there are lots of people I could suck up to whose approval is going to mean nothing to me. There are all kinds of people I run into on Twitter all the time who try to insult me for my ideology, and they haven't spoken a word to me. They don't know me at all. They they, they might just see my bio and it says something about Ayn Rand, and they just go immediately to insulting me. But these people, like, I could suck up to them and maybe get hundreds more, thousands more followers than I have, but it means nothing to me because their opinion is garbage. So I think if you have standards in your own minds, which you recognize as good, then you're gonna use that as a gauge as to whether someone else's approval is worth anything to you.
How does one know what a good standard is?
It's a good question. I mean, in the deepest way, this could be the foundation of ethics that you're raising. Like, how do you know what is good and bad at all? Like, where do
I mean,
these
well,
concepts
we
even
we
come
do have
from?
we're using good, and I'm guilty of this too. Well, we've been throwing around these terms, good, bad, all these things, but we really haven't really decided what good even looks like, and what we're talking about. Like, are we talking about good in the more metaphysical sense, like the more kind of what one might say, religious kind of sense, or are we talking about good as in effective? Is there a difference, and if so, what's that difference?
This is a huge topic, but just to throw some things out on
I
the
mean,
table.
we got a couple hours here, man. Like, let's just vibe with it.
Okay.
We're just going, okay?
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So I take a secular approach. So I'm not religious. I don't believe in anything supernatural. I only follow reason, logic, the evidence of my senses. So there's no faith. There's no mysticism. Um, I think the ideas of good and bad, they're rooted in the experiences we have of pleasure and pain. That's the sort of naturalistic kind of foundation of normative or evaluative concepts. And if we didn't have those experiences of pleasure or pain, I don't think we would have any basis for forming these concepts of good and bad, right and wrong. But we do have these experiences, and these are not something we choose. They're just biologically inbuilt in us. So
Do you
that,
think
say,
everyone
when we're,
experiences it in the same way? I don't, right? I think that
well,
what
we have
you
to,
might find pleasurable, someone else might find painful, for example.
I think we need to distinguish different categories of affect or feeling. So there are physical feelings, which are just physiological. For instance, you get cut by a knife. It doesn't matter if you're, white, black, young, old, Jewish, Christian. It's going to hurt when that knife goes into you. And likewise, if you're hungry, and then all of a sudden you get some food, some ice cream, and you start licking that ice cream, it's going to feel good, or it's going to taste good, no matter what your ideology
Well,
is.
it'll no, a little correction there. It might give you sustenance, it might fuel your body, but there are some people who just won't eat ice cream because they think it tastes bad. And some people think ice cream tastes good.
I mean, we
Like
have
mint
different
chocolate
tastes, that's
chip
for
ice
sure.
cream, some people would be like,
Sure.
that's my favorite, and other people would be like, ew. So I think it's I don't know if it's as objective as perhaps you're implying here. I think that yes, the knife will absolutely kill you. There will be effects from that knife, but there are some outliers who find pleasure in pain, sadomasochists and things like that. Um, so I
I think that gets a little complicated when you bring in sadomasochism. I think there are some psychological things going on there. If we just start, like, considering infants, you're just fresh out of the womb. You haven't formed any ideas about the world. At that point, I think it's purely physiological. Now, people might have different tastes in things. Like, you like mint chocolate chip. I prefer just plain vanilla. But whatever it is for us, it's fixed by our taste
do you
buds, and
really
maybe that
prefer
can
plain
change over
vanilla? Is
time
that a
too.
real thing, or are you just using these
No,
as?
no, I am not giving away my personal actual
Fair
preferences.
enough.
Just
Fair
as an
enough.
example.
Okay.
So whatever our preferences happen to be, those are hardwired. Like, we didn't choose to have them. Maybe they can evolve over time, and maybe over time our ideas can somehow kind of retroactively influence how we experience something physiologically. Just at a very simple, basic infant sort of level, you think the sensations of pain and pleasure are just hardwired into us. And that provides a basis for for these ideas of good and bad. And we think the things that bring us pleasure, we put on in the side of good. The things that cause us pain, we put on the side of bad. Now, over time, we have to realize we can't just go on immediate experiences of pleasure and pain. Like, it might cause you pain to go to a dentist and have your tooth drilled. But in the long run, if you don't undergo that immediate sort of pain, you're going to have even more pain. So in the long run, you learn
I
that you
get what you're
can't
saying.
just weigh immediate sensations.
I wanna kind of like shortcut the conversation a little bit to get us back to like the topic at hand, though, right? Like, so we're not debating infants, right? We're not like bringing actual children on. So we do have groups of people who have, for whatever reason, they like being rude jerks. They like engaging in what you and I might consider a bad action, right? What would bring me pain? Like, for example, I'll give you an example, a personal example I can give you. I'm physically, I don't like lying. I find it physically repulsive to lie. It's not fun. Whenever I'm not entirely honest with everyone all the time. I've lied before. I've done that before, but it's always been kind of like, ew, right? Like, oh, I don't like it. There are people out there who find it fun, who find lying to be an enjoyable experience. They enjoy when they get to get one over on someone, right? They find it fun to do, right? So they might consider, if we're using your framework here, right? They might consider the action of lying to be good. If they're just going by pleasure, pain, all that, right? If they're just going by effect, even, they may see benefits to lying. They may get material, they may get fame, they may get clout, right? And the better they are at it, the more they'll get. Whereas someone like me would find that reprehensible. It's something I couldn't live with myself if I gained fame by lying, and I would have a huge issue with it. But not everyone would. And so again, the foundational question is, given that that's the case, and given that we can't simply use does it feel good, is it pleasurable, does it bring us joy, to delineate right from wrong or good from bad, what then do we use to delineate these two experiences, these two things, these two states?
Yeah, well, so Ayn Rand has the point that we use life as the standard. Like, if something is conducive to our life, if it makes our life go well, then it's good. If it makes our life go badly, then it's bad. But I think, so if it goes away from life, i.e., to death, but I think those two sync up with joy and pain. I don't think they're like totally divorced, separate. The things that tend to promote your life are also the things that tend to promote happiness. And the things that pull you towards death are also the things that cause unhappiness or suffering. You mentioned things like clout and fame, material wealth. I don't think that's the most important factor to decide if someone is truly doing well in life or experiencing happiness. Like, take someone like Donald Trump. I don't think he's a happy person, even if he's a billionaire, even though he's very popular. He has
What
tens
metric
or
are you
hundreds of
using to
millions of
say he's
people.
unhappy?
Well, I think it comes back to my own experience of life
Okay.
and what causes me to, which is ultimately all you can go by. Like, if we just stipulate a psychological state for him and we say he's happy, then I can't argue with that. But all I can go by is what makes me happy, and use that as a basis for what would make someone else happy. Given that we are the same species, I don't think we're so radically different that. Now, I can allow for some differences, like maybe what tastes better to you is mint chocolate chip, and what tastes better to me is vanilla. Or maybe the kind of career that gives you satisfaction is to be a computer engineer, and the sort of career that gives me satisfaction is to be a philosopher. So there's definitely some optionality in there. I don't think everyone has to do the exact same kind of life in order to experience happiness, but I think there are limits to the optionality. Like, I don't think you can be living a life like a murderer or a suicide bomber or a
Well, you're
politician
not living
who
your life as a suicide bomber. I mean, just by definition, you're not
yeah,
going to be
that's not going to be
alive
a very
much
long
longer,
life.
right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, and since I don't believe in the supernatural, I don't think you're going to get 72 virgins in an afterlife either. So I think you just lose altogether, and that if you go down that road. But so I think there is some optionality in how you can live a good, flourishing, happy life. But I think there are limits to that, and I think lying, especially if you're a serial liar and don't give a damn about the truth at all, which I think seems to be a pretty good description of a lot of what Trump does. And I think that's outside of bounds. I don't think that's within the realm
interesting.
of happy lives.
It's hard because I couldn't tell you, right? I don't know enough. I don't have enough information to give you any kind of real read on whether Trump is happy or not. I don't know if simply because he's engaging in a life that I would personally not want to live means that he is unhappy, because while we may be the same species, I do think that there are some people out there, and I'll return to this, that do find not only it to be neutral, but to be good to engage in certain actions where I personally would find those actions bad and reprehensible. So I don't know how we can really look at Trump and say whether or not he is happy or unhappy. I don't know if either of us have that enough information here. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think my experience is strong enough to convince me that it would be a bad idea to live that sort of life. But I mean, if you're unconvinced, or if anyone out there is unconvinced, maybe you should try it. Try to live that sort of life and see what kind of effect it has on you, and get some experimental data, right? So you're not just speculating. Um, and maybe that's you should give it a try. I mean, if you really are convinced that that might be as good or maybe even better in the sort of life you're living, then maybe you should try it. Now, I wouldn't try it because I think my experience is
Sure.
sufficient enough to convince me that's like I don't have to uh you know what's something I've never done before? I've never stuck a knife into myself, right? I've never stabbed myself with a knife.
Okay.
Now, does that mean, well, I've never done it before? Maybe I should try it out in order to see if I would really like something like that or not. Well, no, I don't have to try that because I've had enough similar experiences.
Certainly.
Maybe I've gotten pricked with a tack or something, and that's been painful enough. And I can extrapolate from my experience that something even larger is going to cause even greater pain. So you can use a limited amount of experience that you've had in your own life to figure out whether something might be a good idea for you to try or would be a terrible idea. By using my own experience, I think I can induce that it would not be a good idea to live the sort of life that Trump has,
But
be a
look at what
serial
Trump
liar. But
has. Let's just look at Trump,
yeah.
what Trump has. Like, if someone were to follow the path of Trump and receive the same results he did, which again isn't guaranteed, obviously, but again, they perform the actions that Trump did, they receive the same result. Well, look what they have. They have power. They're in the presidency. They have money. He's a billionaire. They have a fame. He's on everyone's radar, like him or love him. Like, what most people would could be considered to be metrics of success in life. And to be clear, I guess just to back up a little bit, my metric for whether or not a life is well lived isn't happiness, it's success, right? And I have maybe different metrics for success than others might, but you can, I think that even people who were unhappy but still contributed a lot to society, their lives were well lived, right? We could look at Tesla. Like, he died penniless, poor, right? But his contributions to life, you know, was good. I think he lived his life well. Did I think he lives his life perfectly? No. But I think that contributing to um, the human condition in a positive way is a measure of success. But back to the point at hand, though, like, most people would say, if you're rich, if you're famous, if you're powerful, you're probably successful. And they can look at Trump and say, hey, he got to that success by engaging in those activities. If I was successful, I'd be happy. He's successful. he should be happy. Where's the flaw in the logic?
I think these are superficial. Being rich, being politically powerful, being famous. I would not want that if the price of it were to have to live the sort of life that Trump lives, because I don't think it would lead to happiness. And I think that is what ultimately matters. There's a line from somewhere in the New Testament, I think Jesus says somewhere, "What profiteth a man to gain the whole world if he lose his soul?" Something like that. I haven't quoted it exactly. But the idea is you can get all these external material sort of rewards, but they're meaningless. They're worthless if you lost your own soul. If you become a bad person on the inside, you can't really enjoy it. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, even though I'm not religious and I profoundly oppose the ethics of Jesus or Christianity, the ethics of self-sacrifice and
You
altruism.
hold on, wait. You oppose the ethics of Jesus. I don't want to get distracted, but as someone who is agnostic, someone who is raised religious, but I am agnostic. I don't know if God exists or not. I cannot tell you with any degree of certainty whether that's true. However, I look at the principles as taught by Christ in the New Testament, and I think this, if everyone lived a Christ-like life, we would be in a paradise on earth. The life would be so much better. Principles of loving your neighbor as yourself, principles of walking the extra mile, principles of turning the other cheek. These kinds of Christ-like virtues, if lived by the world, would make the world a better place. Do you disagree?
I do disagree. And there's one you didn't mention, which is love your enemies. And I think that is, uh, you could chalk something up like our. I think we've had this. I mean, bringing in many other things here, but our foreign policy, I think, is very weak. I think we should have much stronger.
Can
We
you
shouldn't
give me
have
an example
faced
of
something
what you
like.
would like the U.S. specifically, assuming you're talking about in the context of the United States? Yes. What would you like to see? Because I don't necessarily disagree with you here, but what would you like to see us be stronger in the foreign policy front? Can you give me an example of that? What do you mean by stronger?
Yeah, I think we should have taken out Iran a long time ago, maybe back in 1979 or 80, when right after they took the American hostages. Yet we let this radical fundamentalist Islamic regime fester for decades, and now they're funding proxy terrorist groups, Hezbollah, Hamas, who've killed hundreds, thousands of people across the decades. Um, so that's a case where I think we've been far too weak. We should have taken out Iran long ago, which I think is the spiritual fountainhead of terrorism. It is good to go after something like Al Qaeda, right, and Taliban and Afghanistan, but that's not really the core of the where the problem is emanating from. I think Iran is kind of the head of the snake, and we haven't faced that threat. There, and I'm hopeful that we will, or someone will overthrow that regime, which treats its own people terribly. But that's a case where if you're under these Christian altruist ethics of loving your enemy, well, how are you supposed to stand up confidently against these evil
Do you
regimes
not
around
think
the
you could
world?
oppose someone you love?
I don't think it really makes sense ultimately. I think it's incoherent, and I think that's why religions have to be taken on faith. They don't really make
Mhm.
rational sense.
I don't know.
So you
There's
just have
like, for
to.
example, I'll give you an example. There are people um, who I love, right? Who have done things that I find reprehensible, um, and I think that they should face consequences for their actions because, well, in part because I love them, right? Because I know that without consequences, they are going to continue to engage in this behavior. This behavior is going to hurt not only them but others, and I don't want to see that for them. And so, because I love them, I turning their asses into the cops, right? Like, I'm absolutely going to help make sure that they face consequences for their actions. So I don't find it incoherent to see. Well, we love the people of Iran. They are under oppression right now, even though they are our enemy. So we're going to eliminate that oppression from them. I find that to be totally coherent, totally within the realm of uh, it's just logical. It's sound reasoning.
We need to distinguish between the Iranian regime and its people. I think there are a lot of people there who are worthy of helping out, and they're on our side or we're on their side. And probably a lot of people there would love to be liberated by some other country. But I think there's a certain point where I think you're beyond forgivable. I mean, if you're engaging in terrorism and you're murdering people, I think that's beyond the pale, and there's no coming back from that. You just have to be destroyed. So if we're talking about the leaders of Iran, I think they need to be taken out and annihilated. But the people of Iran, I have a much different evaluation of them. I think a lot of them probably would like to be free.
No, I agree with it 100%. And like I said, I don't think I don't find that to be incompatible with Christian ethics. I think that there are many times in Christianity where the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old have said these people need to be gone, and they were made to be gone, right? They were wiped out, and I think it's a little more coherent than you're probably applying. But we're not here to argue Christian ethics. We can if you'd like, right? But we are kind of to talk about the concept of good, and what that means. And I'm still trying to get an answer. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like I don't know what you. I know what I mean, but I don't know what you mean when you say good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so maybe just to put it in a nutshell, and then we can try to unpack
Sure.
it further, it would be good is that which is conducive to life and happiness, meaning your own life and happiness. So,
Hold on.
if
What?
something,
Hold on.
go ahead.
If it would hurt your life but help 10 others, would that not be good?
Yeah, that's what I would say. So, if something destroys my life, but it helps many other people survive, I would not say it's good, unless I love those people. But then, like, here's an example. Let's say I've got a spouse, and she's drowning, and am I going to risk my life to swim out to the lake and risk my own life? Maybe I'll drown by trying to save her. Um, is it in my self-interest to try to save her? Well, I think it would be, because my life is going to be miserable without the spouse. So in this case, I
But if it
might be
was a
doing something that
stranger, so
benefits
someone you
someone
didn't
else. Well,
know.
just a second, just a
Oh, sure,
second.
sure, sure.
If I might do something that benefits somebody else, but the reason I'm benefiting this other person is because they matter to me. So it all comes back to me in the end. I wouldn't just kill myself as an end in itself to benefit some other people that had no impact on my own values, who didn't matter to me. Strangers, right? I wouldn't give up
Interesting.
my own life for strangers. But if it were someone very dear to me, then I would risk my life. But it's not an act of selflessness; it's self-interested for me to do that.
Lactoid TV rating with a party of 9. Thank you, Lactoid, for the raid. I saw some of your show. It was great. It was a good discourse. We're talking with Mr. Dan Norton today, and we were talking about the concept of good, what that means, and we have gotten to selfishness versus selflessness, and we're about to have a little discussion. So sit on back, tune on in. It should be fun. Um, well, I'll just ask you
By
this.
the way, I think I saw Lactoid TV on your channel at one
He's been
point, and
a few
if he's interested in having a chat, feel free to get in touch.
I'll let you guys discuss that some point in time. Um, well, let me ask you this. Let me get like a standard here. Do you return your shopping cart?
Sometimes, not always.
Mm.
Sometimes I'll just like put it between where the cars park. Sometimes I'll take it back. Maybe it depends partly on distance, but
Okay.
I figure people have there's no contract that says if you use a shopping cart you have to put it back. There are people who go out there, that's their job to do that. So I don't feel like I have an obligation
Okay. Do you,
to do
when you are
this.
using a public restroom, do you flush the toilet?
I do.
Okay. Why? It doesn't benefit you. You get nothing from that, right?
Doesn't it's well, for one thing, it's gross to just leave it sitting there.
Sure, but there's
So I get an
no
aesthetic
like you're
benefit.
not. I mean, you're not going back almost assuredly, right? You're not going back. You don't have to clean it, right? You don't have to deal with it. Doesn't benefit you at
I don't
all.
even want to see it myself. I don't even want to see it myself.
Okay, right?
Aesthetically pleasing to not have it in view. It is in my self-interest, I would say, to flush the
Well,
toilet.
I would agree with you. But what I'm trying to get out with these questions, with the shopping cart question, which to be clear, gang, you should return your shopping cart, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's a long way away. There is no official social contract, but we do have expectations. Uh, the reason I'm asking these questions is because I'm trying to get where your levels are of, are you willing to sacrifice to benefit the community? And I think that more people should be willing to give up a little to help the community. I'm not asking you to destroy your life. Like, obviously, if someone's drowning in the lake and you are not a strong swimmer, I'm not asking you to jump in and have two people drowning now, right? Obviously. But if you're like if you have a high degree of certainty that you are able to rescue someone, even a stranger, and the risk is very low, I think that you should do it, even if you care not for that person. And I would argue that you should do it even if it's someone who is your political enemy, right? Knowing that their death would benefit you somehow. Like, say it's grandma. You don't like grandma. Grandma is heir to a fortune, right? And so you know if she drowns, you're going to make out like a bandit. You're going to get her house. You're going to get her cars. You're going to get all that money. It would be a beneficial act to just let her drown because you'd have plausible deniability, right? Like, I didn't want to go out there and risk my life. You'd face almost no repercussions at all. I still think you should save grandma.
I think maybe in many cases you should, and I would. I mean, assuming you have a decent relationship with your grandma. Now, if she's an evil woman who's trying to destroy your life, she's made your whole life miserable, then I might think twice about it. Um, so, but if I did save her, I don't think it wouldn't be a sacrifice, right? It would be because she somehow benefits my own life. Even if it were a stranger, if I thought I had a decent shot at saving someone and it wasn't a big risk to me, then I think it could also be self-interested to try to save a stranger. I might feel bad trying to. It would be hard to live with myself if I thought I could easily save this drowning person and I didn't. I don't want to live in that sort of world where people are just indifferent to someone losing their life when you could easily save it. It's not conducive to a very benevolent, positive, happy sort of life, I would say. So I think it is self-interested to do certain acts even if it's for a
In a
stranger.
disconnected way, perhaps. In a disconnected way, perhaps I would agree with you. Um, but I think that, and this might be my religious upbringing. That's fair. If you're gonna say, well, you were just raised by this way, right? This is your product of your upbringing. I think that's a fair critique of my point here. But I think it is noble, actually, to getting nothing from it, to sacrifice with the intent to save others. I think it's a noble thing. I think more people should engage in that. Like, to give up. I served in the military, for example. Um, to put my life on the line to protect what I believe in, right? Even if I knew that some people hated people who served in the military, right? I knew I was going to get like spit on or whatever, right? By a certain group of people, like the Frogans of the world would call me monsters and shit like that. Whatever, right? I'm still protecting them because I believe in that institution. I believe in America, and I think that that's a fundamentally good thing. And I wouldn't consider that selfish. I would consider that in many ways selfless. Why am I wrong?
Yeah, because I think you're actually benefiting. I mean, if you're serving in the military of a country like the United States, you're serving a country which is, I would say, dominantly free. Um, so we enjoy a great many freedoms in this country, which many people around the world do not enjoy, and it's in our interest to have this sort of country. We don't want it just to be conquered by some dictatorship, some evil oppressive regime like Iran, and have to live in a country like that. So it's very much in our interest to defend and protect this sort of country and the values we have. So I think it's a very self-interested thing to serve in the military. Now, if you lived in a country like Iran, I would not consider it self-interested to defend that sort of country. Now, you could be conscripted, in which case you don't have a choice about it. And I wouldn't judge that sort of person harshly in the way I would judge someone who voluntarily said, I'm all in favor of terrorizing the rest of the world and imposing Sharia law. on other countries, and that's why I'm joining the military. So if you look at the motivations, I think that's important to assessing whether someone's actually acting in a self-interested or self-destructive sort of way. I don't think you're being self-destructive if you're fighting to defend a free country. Patrick Henry famously said, "Give me liberty or give me death." So he recognized it wasn't even worth living if you didn't have liberty, if you didn't have freedom. It's definitely a value worth trying to support and keep. You don't want to let that go. Freedom is not free. So I think it's
But
definitely in your self-interest.
I don't know if it is, right? So, for example, if let's use Ukraine as an example, okay? Um, most people would say, I don't know if they'd be right or wrong here, right? I think they're more wrong, but let's just go with it. Let's live in their world. Um, uh, what benefit does America get for protecting Ukraine? Not much, right? Nothing direct. Um, but I still think we should do it. I still think America should pay a cost to save Ukraine from Russia. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's selfless a little bit because again, Ukraine's not giving us much. But I think that we do have an obligation if we have the ability to protect people who are weaker than us, even if it would hurt us. Do you
Okay,
not
so
think people
I
have
don't
that
think.
obligation? Let's talk about from obligation, like responsibilities. Okay. Do you think that someone who is strong has a responsibility or an obligation to protect someone who is weaker than them, even if they have no connection, even if they have no legal liability, even if they have no kind of like string to this guy, right? Does a man have an obligation to protect someone else if they can?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on how you fill in the details of the case. So let's say there's another. Just to take a very far-fetched example, say there's another. There's a colony in another galaxy. There's a whole world, and there's some people who are being oppressed on this. Somehow we find out this other galaxy. There's this one group of people or aliens which is being oppressed by another. Do we now have an obligation to find a way to get over to that other galaxy and stop the oppression? Well, I don't think so.
Well, what if we ever already had the
Well,
technology, right? We already have the technology. We already have the ability. It wouldn't. It would cost us a little bit. Um, we could.
so I think it depends on how easy it would be. So if we had like a Star Trek's transporter and we could just beam ourselves over there very easily and overthrow the oppressors and then come back, I'd say sure we should do it. So I
Well,
think it
where's the
depends
line on
on
that
how.
then? I had a question because you said if it's easy enough. Like, how hard would it have to be for you to be like, okay, it's a little too much. There's a little too much effort that we need to put in, so we shouldn't do it.
I don't think
I
there's
know it's
a.
sci-fi. It's a sci-fi scenario, right? See, I'm not going to hold you to
Yeah.
like super specifics, right? But
Yeah, I don't think there's a very easy, like formulaic kind of way to answer that question. I think you just have to judge each case take it on a case by case basis and decide, given the resources we have at our disposal, given what else is going on in my life right now, or does it make sense for me, given my values and the time and resources I have at my disposal, to make an effort to try to help this other person out. Maybe in some cases the answer is yes, it does make sense for me to try to help. And in other cases, I think no, it would just be a net negative on my life. And so it's not worth doing. And it's unfortunate, but my primary purpose here is to pursue my own life, not to rid the universe of negative things, no matter how costly it is to myself.
I don't know if that should be our purpose. Like, I don't know if people their primary purpose, right, should be simply the accruing of positivity for themselves. Um, I don't think that's
Egoism.
necessarily bad, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with being happy, with gaining status, with gaining material. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong in that. But I don't know if I would say that that should be our primary purpose in life.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is just something you, as an individual, you can reflect on it and ask yourself, well, what's most important to me and does it make sense? Now, when I ask myself that question, I can't see any reason to value something higher than my own happiness. I think that's the purpose of life, is to achieve your own happiness and make the most out of this one life you have that you can. I say one life because I'm not religious. I don't believe there is an afterlife. And I
Fair.
think if you do
Yeah.
believe that there's an afterlife, you might think, well, I don't really have to make the most out of this life because I'm going to have, another chance at it. And that, I think that's gonna, I think that's unfortunate because I don't think you really do have another chance. But I can't see any reason in my own case to not make my own happiness the most important thing. I mean, what's the point of doing anything else?
There's plenty of points, right? Like, so if you and we mentioned, and even you would agree under certain conditions, right, that there are values that you put higher, like liberty, for example, right? We talked
No,
about
no,
that
I don't put
earlier.
that higher than myself. No,
Really?
it's liberty is a value to me. The reason I value liberty is because I don't want to live as a slave. I'm not going to be happy if I'm living as a slave in some oppressive regime. So, I mean, liberty is conducive to my own happiness, and that's why I value it.
Interesting. I just think that, however, a soldier who may or may not face imprisonment or slavery if he defends freedom or doesn't defend freedom, right? Um, like a soldier that went to a foreign war, right? Their country might have less, lose status. There might be some consequences, but the individual soldier is unlikely to feel, or there's not a a certainty that he will bear the costs, right, of failure in this war. I still think it is a good thing for them to protect the concept of liberty, even if they themselves won't bear the cost of the lack of liberty. Does that make sense?
Not sure I entirely got it. So,
Okay, let me try again then. So you have a
yeah,
man, a soldier.
yeah,
The war is lost. If the war is won or lost, either way, he and his family will still be free. There might be others who are not free
okay.
if they happen to lose, but he and his family, his friends, they're going to be fine. Okay, they're not going to suffer any real consequences besides maybe lack of, maybe a guilty feeling, right? Um, I think it's still a noble and just saying, and he should put himself in harm's way to prevent the enslavement of others if he has that power and ability.
Well, is the idea that his country is under attack. So,
Let's even not even go into the
he's
let's hold on. Let's bring it back. So a soldier
okay.
is in a foreign country. He sees a slaver taking slaves. He knows that if he engages that slaver and his comrades, there is a risk of him dying, right? He doesn't know the people that are being taken into slavery. He doesn't know any of them. If he lets it happen, he'll be fine. His family back home will be fine, but those people are not going to be fine. Again, there's a 50-50 chance if he engages, he might die. Should he
Yeah.
engage? I would say yes. What would you say?
I think it depends. So I was trying to make it concrete in my mind to help me
Certainly.
get a better grip and have an answer. So I was thinking, this is some American soldier, and let's say there's some oppressive regime in Africa, and they've conquered some other some group of people, and they've made slaves out of them. So there's some slavery in Africa. That's the situation I was imagining in my mind. Should this American go over? It's not that this African nation who's enslaving some people in Africa has come over to America and attacking Americans. So it's not like America's under attack. The idea is his own country and people are not under attack, but should this soldier go over to Africa and try to liberate the people that are being oppressed? Is
I
that
would say
a
yes if
fair?
he can. I would
Okay,
say yes if he can. If he had all else being equal, and obviously it's not. We don't live in a vacuum. Like weakening, putting our resources towards one thing means necessarily we'll have to weaken it towards others, right? So it's a little more complex in the real world, right? But in the hypothetical, you have a soldier. He sees this happening. He has the power to act. Should he act?
I don't think there's one answer to that. Like if you are, I think it's kind of like there was a case that came up earlier. Maybe it was the drowning one. Like depending on the situation, let's say you're a super soldier, you're Rambo, and you have just so much training, and you could easily go over there and liberate these people. Um, then I think it's more likely that it would make sense and be self-interested for someone who's got that sort of skill level to go over and try to take out the oppressors. But if you're just an average soldier and you can't do this amazing feat on your own, then I think it's less likely that it would make sense for you to try to liberate these people. In either case, I don't think it's something the American military should be involved with. It would just have to be an individual choice by
Well,
particular
a soldier
soldiers who
can't
maybe could
doesn't
get
make
together.
policy, right? Like, so an individual soldier has no ability to realistically affect national policy decisions. But I'm talking like on a personal level, and this is how I try to make my decisions. I put myself in the people's shoes. If I was in that situation, what would I do? And if I was in the situation of those on the opposite side, what would I want done to me? Like, how would I want to be treated in these situations, right? Again, the golden rule, Christian ethics, do as unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Um, if I, right, were a soldier and I saw this happening and I had the ability to perhaps stop it, again, I'm not talking suicide here. Like, again, if I'm walking down the street and I see 20 people beating up a dude, I'm calling the cops and I'm going away. I can't deal with that because they're going to beat me up too. There'll be 20 people beating up 2 people instead of 20 people beating up 1 person, right? I get that. But if I see someone accosting a woman on the street that I don't know and they're about my size and I think I have a 50-50 shot at taking them, I think I do have an obligation to try.
Yeah, I mean that sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
I think it just depends on the particulars of the case. I don't think there's one universal answer as you should always try to intervene when there's some kind of
Yeah, I think there
justice
is
going
though.
on
That's
somewhere
what
in
I'm
the
trying to
world.
get across. So I think that the principle I'm trying to get across here, and I'm a poor communicator, so forgive me if I'm communicating this poorly, is that if you have the ability and if the risk is acceptable enough, and that I think we can nitpick the details there, that yes, you do have an obligation to intervene when something that is unconnected to you is happening that would be, I would consider, a bad thing, such as a woman being accosted, someone being enslaved, all these things. I do think that you have a moral obligation, and failure to do that, right? Failure to fulfill that obligation makes you less of a person, even though it might make you unhappy, it might cost you, it might carry a sacrifice, right? Yeah.
My fundamental point here is just that whatever obligations you have, if they're to make sense, they should be self-interested. So I might think, yeah, you do have an obligation to help some elderly woman who's looks like she's being harassed by someone. Now, exactly what form your help takes, I think is just going to depend. Like if she's being harassed by some huge guy who looks like he could destroy you very easily, maybe I'm just going to help her by calling the cops, and that's all that the form of my help is going to take. If it's someone who I think I can physically confront, and then I'm more likely to not just call the cops. Maybe I'll try to interfere physically. But in either case, in any of these cases, I think it is helping me. It is self-interested. I don't want to live in the sort of world where innocent people are being harassed, assaulted. That's not the sort of world I want to live in, and I'm trying to make the world more of the sort of place that I want to live in by intervening. So it's not irrelevant to me, even if it's a stranger. So it does redound back to my
Hmm.
self-interest in the end. If it had no relevance to my life at all, even indirect relevance, then I don't think it would make sense to intervene.
Certainly.
But I think it
And
does
that
have an
might
effect
make
on my
that,
life.
that might work for you, right? So because you have your your sole principle isn't self-interest here. It's not. You have other principles that tie into your self-interest. Perhaps you might put self-interest above those other principles, but there are other principles at play. No?
You could say that as long as you said, self-interest is. I
For
think of it as
you,
the
that is,
fundamental.
yes.
So, like, I value other things, like I mentioned, liberty. The reason I value
Mm.
liberty is because it serves this more fundamental value I have, which is my own self-interest.
So my problem, however, with putting self-interest as with advocacy for people to put self-interest as the top of their list is the connecting principles to that. What other principles does a person have that they feel flows into their self-interest? And I don't think we can trust people. In fact, I don't trust people, right? Uh, to have good, solid principles that they feel would feed into their self-interest. Therefore, what I advocate for are principles that I know will do good for everyone, and say that you should put those principles above your self-interest, because while your self-interest might align a lot with values I think are good, such as liberty, such as freedom, such as the ability to fight against evil, etc., blah, 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 right? Not everyone's self-interest is going to be focused on that, right? For others, their self-interest would involve enslaving others.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. But to explain why that's the
Please,
case, I
go
mean,
ahead.
that's something we could talk about. But I just want to say first that there are, in Ayn Rand's view, in her philosophy, which she calls objectivism, she identifies 7 virtues. These are core principles that make up a good life and that make up a self-interested life on her view. So just to give a more fleshed out kind of view of what self-interest consists of on Ayn Rand's view, I'm going to name the 7 virtues that she identifies.
Please.
So the fundamental one is rationality, using your minds to guide your life and your actions, not just acting on the whim of the moment, as we talked about early in the conversation, not thinking about the consequences of your actions, using your reason, as opposed to, for instance, going by faith, where you believe things without evidence, which I think is a core part of religion. So that's the fundamental virtue, rationality. But then you can break that down into there's different aspects. What does it mean to be rational? There's different ways of being rational. So independence, thinking for yourself, not just following the herd. Um, Integrity, being loyal to your principles. In other words, loyalty to rational principles, not irrational principles. Um, Honesty, justice, productiveness, and pride. And each of those could be an entire conversation unto itself, and we can dig into any of those if you'd like. But I just want to put a little more meat on the bones of what it means to be self-interested in Ayn Rand's view. Now, I know a lot of people think that being selfish or self-interested means something very different than, for example, being honest. It could mean if you're a self-interested person, you might cut corners and try to engage in fraud. Um, I disagree with that. I think if you take a long run view, you won't come to the conclusion, if you're honestly thinking about it, that it is in your self interest to take these sorts of actions like cutting corners, engaging in fraud. That's a discussion. It's a debate we could have. And it has to be had. I don't think it's obvious that what a self interested life consists of. This is something you have to think about and figure out. It takes some mental work.
And this is,
Um,
yeah, I agree with
yeah.
you in some of this, right? I do. I'm not entirely against what you're saying here. But again, I want to stress that not everyone's going to come to the same conclusions on this that you are. And many, in fact, will come to conclusions that you find to be abhorrent. Um, and thus, by advocating for self-interest, even in what you would consider self-interest, with the virtues as you laid them out, what you are doing is you're setting yourself up for failure societally, right? Because society often, and individual members within that society, will come to completely different conclusions than you are. And so rather than go by what I would consider a universal good, we are looking at everyone gets to decide what they think is good. And I think that that's a recipe for disaster.
I don't think it makes sense to give up on self-interest because different people are going to come to different ideas of what self-interest consists in. I mean, I don't think it makes sense to lie to people and say it's not good to pursue your. I mean, for me, it would be a lie to say it makes sense to not pursue your self-interest because some people might interpret that in a way that I consider to be irrational, distorted. I would rather take the approach
Okay, no,
of
I'm fine. Hold on.
trying to persuade
I
people.
wanna, I wanna just clarify because I think you're maybe I said it wrong or something. Like, if you personally want to live your life by self-interest, have at it, right? That's all. That's you. But when we come to, like, when we are telling others, when we are preaching, when we are advocating to others, like, and someone else asks me, how should I live my life? I'm not going to use, I'm not going to tell, just do what is in your own self interest. I'm never going to say that because, right, of the reasons I laid out before, which is what they will ultimately decide is in their self interest might be things that I find abhorrent. And so, what I will advocate that others do is much more kind of like a Christian ethic of you need to put others before yourself, live by the golden rule, etc. Do unto others as you would have them do to you, turn the other cheek. And I think that that would lead to better outcomes overall societally. So again, while you personally might say, I've decided to live my life in my best interest and under these virtues, under these rules, under these six strict set of criteria, more power to you. But what I'm saying is we shouldn't be trying to preach this to the masses. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. I don't agree with it. So I was
Sure.
thinking, like, if you think it's better to promote the Christian ethics, then you have to deal with things like loving your enemy, which raises problems of the sort that we were talking about before. I think you're far too weak, and you open yourself up to exploitation and abuse by adopting this sort of self-sacrificial ethics. I mean, if you tell people you should follow the Christian ethics, does that mean they should strive to emulate Jesus
Yeah.
and be sacrificed on a cross? I don't think that's very
That's
conducive.
not what we mean.
Happy life.
He did not. He was killed, right? Like, this isn't, when we talk about follow the Christian ethics, we're not asking you to martyr yourself, right? However,
Well, are you? I
if there
mean,
is
what about someone like Mother Teresa?
if there is a
I mean, a lot of people hold up Mother Teresa as like this moral ideal, and this is someone who's famous for being consistent about self-sacrifice, right? Devoting her entire life to others to the point of like going over
sure.
and spending her life tending the sick and the poor in India. She's held up as this moral ideal, and I would consider that a sort of self-sacrificial life. And if you don't emulate her, then you at least have grounds to feel guilty that you're not doing that. Maybe you're living in some Western
Look,
country
Christ
pursuing a
wasn't
career and making
Christ
money.
wasn't some peacenik, right? He basically flipped tables, whipped the bankers out of the banking. He called King Herod a slur. He used that fox, right? He gave him the silent treatment. He wasn't this guy who just took it, right? Um,
Turn the
but
other
there
cheek.
is a
Well, I think there are inconsistencies probably in religion. I mean, I think that's part of being a ancient work of. Um,
yeah, well, obviously yes, and when we talk about Christianity, then you have to ask the question, what Christianity? But I think that the basics, right, the very basics, again, the Sermon on the Mount stuff, right, the do good to those who hate you, turn the other cheek, etc.
yeah, I
Again,
think
if more
that's
people
not
live by
good.
that ethic, I think it would be a better world. Yeah,
I don't think it is going to lead to a better world if you do good to people who hate you. If you turn the other cheek, if you love your enemies, I think that's a recipe for a bad world, actually. Which is not to say there's no things in Christianity that I would agree with. Like I gave that quote earlier from Jesus about what profiteth a man to gain the whole world if he lose his soul. So I think that's got some real good insight to it, and I would agree with that sort of thing. But there's a lot that I think is very bad in Christianity, and that is not conducive to your own happiness or a good world. I think a lot of the problems in the world do trace to Christian ethics, and we talked about some
such
of the
as
ones in foreign policy,
oh,
like the ones with their
foreign policy.
not
Um,
not. Yeah.
Well,
But
hold on.
domestic as well. I mean, I think the entire Christian ethics has been secularized in a way. So a lot of people, even if they're not nominally religious, they're sort of culturally religious in the sense that they still accept that it's good to be altruistic, and even if they don't sign on to Christianity, they think it's good to live for others and
Hold
be
on. Do you think that
selfless.
most people in the world, right? Well, no, let's just use the states as an example. Let's keep it domestic here, because I would contend, like, if Iran was more Christ-like, then we wouldn't have the problems we do, right? Obviously, okay. So, it's their failure to follow these ethics that have created the problem that we have. Um, let's look at domestics when it comes to altruism. Do you think that most people live by an altruistic ethic system in America?
I think they at least give lip service to it and live to it by some extent. I don't think most people are
Lip
consistent
service,
about it.
yes, but I think that almost no one practices it. Almost no one.
But I think there is, if we look at something like Social Security, Medicare, what justifies programs like these where you are coerced by the state to help others? Well, is there no altruism going on there? Like if you pose that, you say, "No, I want to keep my own wealth. I don't want to have my wealth taxed away to support random people and pay for their health care and their retirement. I want to keep it." And you might be met with the
Unless you're an
accusation, "Aren't
old
you being
person, in which
selfish?"
case, yes, I want other people to pay for my shit.
Well, then I think you're being irrational about what your self-interest consists of. You're one
Okay.
of those short-range sorts of people who aren't thinking about the consequences, the full context. I don't think that's a rationally self-interested person. But I think a lot of our social programs, welfare, healthcare, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they're justified on the grounds that, well, people shouldn't be left to starve on their own. They shouldn't be left without healthcare. My attitude is rather, people are they can take care of themselves. They don't need to be taken care of by other people, and it's immoral to coerce other people
You
to
would
do
have
this.
been
But
against
it's
the New
justified
Deal,
on the
for
grounds of
example.
altruism. Excuse me?
FDR's New Deal, you would have been against that.
Oh yeah, totally.
Mm, fair
I
enough.
think that's where a lot of problems go back to. That's where the government started to get really big. I think the 19th century, where the government didn't interfere. I mean, post-slavery, slavery was an abomination.
Fair enough.
But in the latter part of the 19th century, when it was more laissez-faire and government did not interfere in people's lives, I think that was probably the economically freest time in our country's
But
history. And there was explosive growth, and millions of people from around the world immigrated here because they saw it was a great place, much freedom and opportunity.
since the New Deal, the standard of living, not just in America, but, well, again, we'll just use America for the example. Yeah, in America, the standard of living has exploded, right? We are at uh, if you took the life of a person pre New Deal, so we're talking like the 20s and something, and you compared it to the average person's life today, the average person has more wealth, is living longer, is happier, is healthier, all these metrics, right? Um, so by what metric would you say that the New Deal was poor or a failure? In fact, I would argue, before you answer that, I would argue that FDR saved us from fascism and socialism because of the New Deal. And the if he had done nothing, or if he had done a lot less, we would have succumbed to the extremities that other countries, such as Germany, such as Soviet Russia, succumbed to. And it would have been overall a worse thing for America and Americans. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think government was not the savior. I think government created solutions to problems that government created. A lot of people say that the Great Depression was a result of capitalism. It was not. There was a Federal Reserve Bank established in 1913, I believe. There was a federal income tax amendment passed in, or maybe that was 1913. But anyways, decades prior to the New Deal, there was massive government intervention in the economy, and that led to problems which eventually caused the Great Depression. But it was not like there was a free market prior to the New Deal.
Certainly. Like,
Um,
again, I'm not saying that the government's the solution to everything, or the government's never done bad things. But if a government breaks something, um, them fixing it isn't necessarily a bad thing either. I think that while there might have been better solutions, uh, I think that under the circumstances that FDR was working in, he did come to the one that worked.
I think we would have gotten out of the Depression much sooner, quicker, if there weren't more government intervention. That was the problem that got us into the Great Depression, was government intervention. I think the solution is not to do more government intervention; it's to do less. Um, so there hasn't really ever been free banking in the United States. From the very beginning, we had the first bank in the United States, then there was the second bank in the United States, and there was the greenback currency during the Civil War, and then the establishment of the Federal Reserve System. So we haven't had a free banking system, and as a result of this, I think there's been the U.S. banking system has been subject to panics periodically and runs on the banks. It was much more stable in places like Canada and Scotland, which had more of a free banking system, which didn't have like a fiat currency where there was one central bank governing everything. George Selgin is an economist, and Larry White is another one who's done a lot of work about the history of banking in various countries and showing the results, how it's actually gone better, where it's been freer. So U.S. has not been perfect by any means, and one of the ways it's been imperfect is in its lack of a free banking system, which I think was one of the significant causes of the Great Depression.
Maybe.
So capitalism is often blamed for things that are not the result of
Certainly.
capitalism.
I'm a capitalist, so I'm not blaming capitalism.
No, you're not. You're not a
I'm not a
capitalist.
capitalist? Interesting. Why not?
No, not by my understanding or Ayn Rand's understanding, which I think is the correct one.
Fair
But we
enough.
can debate this
I'll
if you'd
I'll, I'll
like.
correct by saying I'm a believer in capitalism.
No, you're not.
Okay. Why not?
Well, let me be a little less confrontational and just say what I mean by it, and then it'll be clear how it differs from my understanding. So I don't think capitalism is the greatest term, by the way, for the system I advocate. I think liberalism might be a better term, but that term has already been co-opted by an ideology which I don't really think is pro-liberty. At least maybe the classical liberals were the more in aligned, had more justification for adopting that label, but the modern liberals, I would say no. So let me say why. So I think the initiation of force is evil. That's like the bedrock principle of my political philosophy. And whenever you regulate or tax people or a nation, you're engaging in the initiation of force. So when I'm taxed, I don't get to choose what to do with my money. The government is coercing me under the threat of throwing me in jail if I don't contribute taxes. So I'm not freely contributing to Social Security or Medicare or welfare or public education or public roads. I'm being forced. It's not left up to my voluntary consent. So
Okay.
it's coercive, and that's anti-liberty. It's not and it's anti-freedom. Also, regulations, for example, like labor regulations, minimum wage. You're not leaving it up to the free, voluntary decision of an employer and employee to decide what they're going to work for. Rather, the government steps in and mandates by force. You have to pay $15
Or
or
let's
$10
say
an hour or
drug
whatever it is.
regulations. You can't put
Yeah.
poison in the drugs. That would be bad. Or harmful things in the drugs. You have to tell people what's in the drugs. That's a regulation. They're making me do it. It's terrible.
Oh no! Well, I thought you were talking about like heroin, that kind of drugs at
No,
first.
I'm
But
talking about
if you just
pharmaceuticals.
mean oh no, well you can't engage in fraud. So if you give someone some drug, some medication, uh, it's on the understanding that it's not going to kill you. It's supposed to make you healthier and help you get better, not worse. So
Or
you could
food, for
prosecute someone
example, a
for
tasty
fraud.
burger. Like if I wanted to make a tasty burger, but I wanted to make it cheap, and so I used substandard meat, substandard products, some standard lettuce, things like that, which had a higher risk of harm, wasn't guaranteed. Do you think that the government should have a say in forcing a certain minimal standard on what level of products you can use in food production?
There just can't be fraud. So if you buy meats, you know there are different qualities of meats, but you can't poison someone. There's different than like serving someone
I
a
understand you can't
hunk of meat that's not the
intentionally
highest
poison
quality
them.
and giving them, yeah.
I understand you can't intentionally poison someone, but do you not think that the government should have the ability to set a minimum standard far above poison, right? Where you have to at least have this percentage of so what I mean by this is a government says you can't put meat that has a above a certain percentage of risk of poisoning people, right? So even if you want to use substandard products, you can't, right? And even if it might not, even if you're like, I'm telling everyone these are substandard, I'm being upfront, they're choosing to buy it anyway. I think that the government should step in and say, no, we expect a certain level. And if you can't meet that level, you can't do business in the United States.
Yeah, I doubt that. Like, if people knowingly do this, they know the risks involved. It's like taking a medication. I mean, or a vaccine. You know, there's potential side effects of taking any medication or vaccine, but you weigh that against the risks, or against the benefits, and you decide, does it make sense for me? Likewise with food, maybe you take a risk of consuming low quality meat, but it's cheaper, and maybe you're on a budget and you can't afford the highest quality meat, and you just have to. I think you should be left as an individual free to
Oh, I
decide, does
disagree.
it make sense in my context to take this sort
Sure.
of
I
risk?
think that I am not freedom as a heuristic. I like freedom, but it's not my highest principle. There are things where I would stop someone's freedom from engaging in. For example, we had a debate on this yesterday. Maids, medical assistance in dying. I think the government should step in and say no. I think that you shouldn't be able to sell your organs. That's another one. Like even if I really wanted to put my kidney or my spleen on the market for $100,000, make a quick buck, right? I think the government should say no. You can't do that. Even if this person consents to selling it and this person consents to buying it, we're gonna nip that bud, right? Like we're not gonna let you do that because I think that there are certain conditions which I find that freedom isn't the highest principle that I apply to.
Yeah, and I think you're being authoritarian
A
in that
little
sort
bit,
of
but that's
example.
okay. A little,
Yeah.
just a
Yeah, and
smidge.
I disagree with that.
Fair enough.
I mean, freedom is not my highest principle either. As I mentioned before, the fundamental is self-interest.
Certainly, and we
But
talked
I do
about
think,
that, right? We went through that, right?
yeah.
But
So if you're gonna, if you think authoritarianism is okay in these sorts of cases, and I would
not
want to
just
know what the
okay,
justification.
necessary in order
Yeah,
to
and
have
I
a
would want to know
functioning
what is
society
the.
that isn't like a fucking hellscape, right? We need certain minimal
Yeah, I think it
standards
makes
of
for a worse
functioning.
society.
I understand that you
I
think
think
that.
that
I
makes
just
for a
think
worse
that I
society.
think that
Oh,
you're wrong, and I'm trying to explain why, right? Like, so we
okay.
disagree on this. This is a point of disagreement, and we're explaining to each other why we think the other person's wrong. I think that if you cannot um that by being permissible to certain activities, the government normalizes certain processes and make things socially acceptable that we should not find socially acceptable. Again, one easy one is food standards. I think that it should be disallowed to sell below a certain quality of product in food because if you do, it has a high degree of likelihood that something bad will happen. This has stresses on the entire system under which we operate. This has stresses to everyone. It makes everyone's life worse when we engage in these kinds of behaviors. And so the government should authoritarianly step in and say, hey, under these certain strictures and conditions, we do not allow you entire freedoms here. We will step in and say no. For another good example is selling drugs like alcohol, cigarettes, things like that. I think that the government has a vested interest in restricting the sale of these products above and beyond that which to children. Like so the legal age for alcohol, for example, is 21. We tried lowering that to 18. We tried that. And deaths due to alcohol related incidences such as drug driving, etc., skyrocketed. So we reversed that. And I think that's good. Why is that bad?
Uh, Well, I don't see that it leads to bad consequences. Well, for on one level of analysis, I think it's bad because it's anti-freedom. But on another level, I think it doesn't have good consequences. I was thinking of prohibition as you were talking. So what happens when the government just banned alcohol entirely? Well, it just created a black market, and there was now mafia people like Al Capone, and lots of violence
Yeah,
surrounding it. And
too
I think
much
that happens with drugs
authoritarianism.
too.
Absolutely, too much authoritarianism. But I think that we do need some authoritarianism, a little amount.
Yeah, so I don't think there needs to be a clear principle, and that's what I think is lacking in this case. My principle is, as long as you're not initiating force against anyone else, and it's fair game, right?
Well,
You
the
might be
principle
harming
would be harm
yourself,
reduction.
but well, harm is so broad. I mean, anything could be considered harm. Like, it might hurt your feelings that I don't smile at
Okay,
you
but in this case, we're
when
talking
you
about
walk by me.
deaths due to alcohol-related incidences such as drunk driving. That's not feelings-related harm.
Well,
That's
that's
harm
physical
reduction
though.
in a
That's
very
physical.
specific incidents because, again, we've seen this through the data. Back in, I think it was the 80s, Reagan did this. He reduced the legal drinking age, from 21 to 18. There was a skyrocket in alcohol-related deaths and accidents and incidences. So they reversed that decision, saying there's too much that's happening, right? And we want to reduce the harm to our population. And I think the government has not just the ability, but the duty to step in under certain conditions and say, hey, this is too much. We need to put a stop to this. And I think they did the right decision.
Well, there you're dealing with the age of majority, and I think reasonable countries can disagree. Reasonable people can disagree. Like some countries, the age of majority is 16, and you're not allowed to do things like smoke or drink or engage in consensual sex, unless you're over 16. Other countries, maybe it's 18. Other countries, maybe it's 21. Now you have to draw the line somewhere. Now there are unreasonable places to draw the line of consent or adulthood, like 5 years old, right? Or 55 years old. But I don't think there's like one right answer that has to be the same, but there's a reasonable range. And I think that's kind of the issue you're raising. You're not really raising an issue of authoritarianism. I think it's more of
Well,
just
it
where exactly
is.
do we draw the
Like,
line.
in America,
Like
we
I
draw
wouldn't say
that line
you're.
at 18 for the age of majority. You can vote, you can hold a gun, you can, or not hold a gun, you can go in the military and put your life on the line. There's a lot you can do at 18 in the country because we consider that a legal adult. However, above and beyond that limit, we have further limits, such as the drinking age to 21, where they're already recognized in every other instance as a legal adult, but because they're under this age, we say no on this. And the reason we do that is because of harm reduction as the principle. And is that authoritarian? By every metric, yes. But it's still, I think, a necessary and a good thing to do. And I want to live in a world where we do it more rather than less.
I don't know that I would consider that a case of authoritarianism. I think it might be an inconsistency. Like I think maybe there should just be one cutoff line, like 18 or 21,
Okay.
and then there shouldn't be further distinctions beyond that. Now, if you're a private organization, where it's not an issue of government setting the age of legal majority, then I think you can have further distinctions. You might say like, I'm not going to hire anyone to be my business partner unless they're at least 30 years old, right? I want them to have at least have had that much life experience. But that's not the government setting this. That's just a private decision. When it comes to the government setting a legal age of majority, I think maybe there should just be one standard. And for that reason, maybe it shouldn't be that there's one age for alcohol consumption and one for cigarette smoking. But I think there could be further distinctions.
Didn't they
however,
raise
not
the
made by the
age for
government.
cigarette smoking? I'm not as familiar with, and this might have been more recent. Like didn't they
I
raise
don't.
the age of purchase
Yeah.
of tobacco to 21? I could be wrong on this.
So I'm not even sure that should be a a government issue. As there's some things that I think should just be left up to the parents. Now, maybe smoking is not one of them, or maybe like if your parents, it would be considered child abuse if you let someone under 5 smoke or under 10, but maybe not if they're over 15 or something. I don't know exactly you would draw the line, but I'm not sure that smoking is something that the government should be deciding, at least if it's over a certain age. I don't know. So the age of legal majority might be a different issue than the age of when people should be able to legally smoke without parental consent. I'm not sure those things necessarily the same.
So I guess let's go back to the principle. My principle here is that the government, under certain conditions and certain factors, has the ability, and it should. I'm advocating for them to do this to restrict individual freedom, and to be able to say, under these conditions, we are going to step in, even if you consent and you consent, and say no. And I give and the
Yeah.
examples I'm giving are the alcohol, right? That's the example that came to mind, and it's one I'm using to argue the point.
And so what's supposed to justify this is the drop in deaths that you cited.
Harm reduction.
Harm reduction.
Yes. Harm reduction, saying that without this, the health of our nation, the safety of our citizens, the well-being of our population would be impacted negatively enough that we're saying, okay, we're stepping in, we're saying no.
Well, one thing I'm wondering about is what exactly does harm mean? Because this is a broad term. Does it mean physical harm? Does it mean psychological harm?
Specifically physical harm, specifically leading to accidents, loss of limb, and life.
Okay, so now
I don't care about
what
feelings.
about diet?
I don't give a shit about feelings.
Right. What about diet? Like, should the government have a role in mandating a certain diet because you can suffer physical damage if you don't eat a certain diet? Maybe you'll get diabetes.
It would depend on the amount of damage as well as the time period in which that damage takes place. So if it's it's something that you do have to look at a little case by case basis. How much damage is this doing? What would be the impact? Like, does it do damage to everyone, or is it just a subset? What's the risk factor at play here? Are we talking about 5% of people who do this, 10% of people who do this, 50% of the people who do this? And we do have to draw lines. And I'm not saying it's something that I know the answer to every single individual issue, right? That I can draw the line for you right now. I can't. You'd have to look at it, right? But I think as a principle, the core that I'm arguing here is that there is a line where if you had 1 million deaths a day because people drank soda, and that was killing 1 million people a day, I would say, okay, time to ban soda. Even though I'm drinking that shit, right? Even though I love it, it's tasty. I would say, okay, no, that's too much. There's a threshold under which, okay, step in, government, protect us, right?
Yeah, so I think there's, I mean, whose life is it? Like, let's say I like to drink Coke, let's say, and it gives me pleasure. And I would rather, let's say, I don't know if there's any way to even know this is true, but let's say if I drink Coke, my life will be 10 months shorter than it otherwise would have been if I never drank Coke. But I decide, I think it's worth it, right? Because I just get a lot of pleasure from it. I really enjoy it. Now,
Sure,
shouldn't I be able to make that choice? I think I should be able to make that choice, and I think everybody should be able to make that choice.
But if it would reduce your life by 30 years if you drank soda, then I think, okay, then we got to go into how is this impacting society? Suddenly we have spikes in the usage of healthcare systems. We have spikes in the usage of in the amount of palliative care and things like that, and our infrastructure isn't as such that we can sustain this, then I think the government should say, okay, look, we need to do something.
I don't think there's, well, for one thing, I was thinking, like, what about suicide? And you mentioned this, you were talking about this yesterday.
I'm against suicide, yes.
You might decide that something is worth the risk of 30 years off your life. Maybe having a military career, maybe that could end your life if you're deployed the next year, right? But you might decide, this is just the kind of life I want to have. I've always dreamed as a kid to grow up and be like G.I. Joe and You just love this kind of life, and you're willing to give it a shot, even though there's a risk that it could cut off a
Well,
massive
sure, but
part of
there's
your life.
societal
I think
benefits to allowing people to take that risk, especially as a soldier,
I
right?
don't
You're
think it's
defending your
about the
nation, right?
societal benefits,
I
and
do.
maybe this is comes down to a root
Yeah.
disagreement we
Yeah.
have. Like, why should the fundamental consideration be other people or society as opposed to yourself? I just see no reason why it should be something other than yourself.
I think that because doing so, if we advocate for that and it is adopted by enough people on a societal level, that I think that my life becomes better, your life becomes better, everyone's life becomes better. When we decenter ourselves and we center the community, we create a better world, not just for me, but for you, right? Like vaccines, for example. Vaccines don't just benefit the vaccinated; they benefit society, right? And it creates a herd immunity, is what it's called. So even if you don't happen to be vaccinated, you are protected because if enough people decide to take the vaccination.
Yeah, so I might value herd immunity, but only because it ultimately benefits me. If it didn't ultimately benefit me, why should I care about it?
I mean, it's what it is, right? Like, we've hit the wall on the fundamental disagreement here. Like, fair. I mean, like that's your opinion. It's just we I think we're circling the drain on the disagreement. Is there any? We got about a few minutes left. Is there anything else you wanted to ask me to discuss or anything like that tonight?
Maybe I'll just mention
Please.
as we were just discussing this last point, Ayn Rand has an article called "Faith and Force: The Destroyers of the Modern World." I think that's the article in which this is. She says there's one question you can ask which um, destroys the ethics of altruism or self-sacrifice.
Ask me the question, and
The
let's
one
see.
word is why, which is kind of what I was trying to do here in this last few minutes. Like, why should I care about this other benefit to society if it has no impact on my own life?
Sure, because again, my
And I
argument would
think
be,
that's just kind of a sorry.
and my argument
Was
would,
that?
my answer to that question, to why, is that because it benefits the lives of the community, and the community keeps the lives of the individuals strong.
Well, if it keeps the life of this individual, that's me,
It might not complete
strong,
your
then yeah,
specific
I can understand
life
that.
strong, but it does help the community as a whole.
Yeah, but why do I care about that if I'm not part of it and not benefiting from it?
Well, you might not, but I think you should.
Okay, why?
As I said, because your offspring, your friends, your family, those you connected to, those you have any kind of love for or positive feelings for, will benefit. And while you might die, or you might have a negative impact to yourself, it will impact those around you much better. And for one, right? And I can't look if this is a question you have to answer for yourself. If you only care about yourself, then nothing I can say will convince you here. But I think that most people care about those outside of themselves. And I think that by appealing to that is how we get to the answer to your question.
I do care about others, but not fundamentally. That's the issue. I think this is a way that self-interest in Ayn Rand's view is often strawmanned or caricatured. They think you only care about yourself. You don't give a damn about others. I've given the example earlier in this conversation about how I might even risk my life to save a spouse, someone I love. But the reason I would do that is because that person matters to me. And if they didn't matter to me, which would be kind of an insult, why would they be my wife if they didn't even matter to me? Then there would be no reason to save them. The reason I do care about others and might go to the length even of risking my life for others is because they matter to me. If it doesn't have
Sure.
any impact on me, what's the point?
Would you want, okay, let me ask you this. Would you want a stranger to save your wife?
Um, I guess if it's gonna
They don't know her, they
benefit
don't know
me
you,
and not be
but would you want someone who is seeing your wife who is in danger, right, in the lake, drowning?
uh,
Would you want that person to jump in and selflessly save your wife?
I don't think selflessly.
Okay,
I
would you
think
want them
if
to
they
save
were
your
to,
wife?
yes,
Yes.
I mean, if
Yes.
you just
And
leave
that's
if,
why
at
we
that
want
level, but
to.
not selflessly.
Sure. But that's
Not
why we want to
selflessly though.
cultivate, right? Cultivate the idea of altruism because it makes it more likely that if you aren't there, that someone else will step in to save your wife.
No, I think they might do it out of self-interest. As I said, I might do it. I might help a stranger who's drowning out of self-interest. I don't think you have to someone be self-interested. You would be more incentivized, more motivated to do it if they did part of your life and you knew the person, but they don't have to be in order for you to consider it self-interested to save someone.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming today. I think we've kind of circled the drain on this. I enjoyed the discussion. I hope my audience did too. Where can people find you if they want to find you?
I am on YouTube at Dan Norton 1, and I'm also on Twitter at Dan Norton 111. And I'm looking to grow my audience. So if you want to check out my content and subscribe, I'd be delighted. And if there's anyone out there who wants to have a conversation, discussion, debate with me, feel free to get in touch and maybe we can set something up. And thank you, Whick,
Of course.
for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Gang, I have links to all his stuff, his Twitter and his YouTube at least, in the YouTube description here today. Click on that link. Check him out. He was kind enough to give his time to talk with us. Be kind enough to give time to like his stuff. Thank you for being here. Okay?
All right. Thanks again for having me. Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Bye.